Hello, everyone. I'm sports anchor Fletcher Macklin. This is a special edition of the WDSU News Hot Seat. Our guest this evening, former Saints tight end Ben Watson. Because Ben played for the Saints, we'll of course talk about the black and gold in a few minutes. But the reason Ben is here is to talk about, amongst other things, race relations in our country. Ben has written books and he discusses this topic very frequently as a contributor on several news networks. Ben, thank you for your time. Let's start with what's happening in our country right now. Peaceful protest because of what happened to George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. Do you think what we're watching right now in our country will bring about real change when it comes to systemic racism in America?
Well, I think it's about our expectations. And do I think that these protests and the death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, do I think that those three combined, along with COVID and everything else that is contributing to uh, just the outpouring of emotion that we've seen, do I think that's going to solve structural racism in America? Completely no. Do I think that it may lead to some adjustments or some policy that will change police strategies and policing? Yes. So I think that there will be specific changes that we'll see, um, but I think that the larger change that all of us really want is a process. And I think what we're seeing and what we all feel is that we're tired of waiting for that process. We want it to speed up, and although we have made tremendous progress in many different areas, there is still obviously a lot that people are still upset about, and rightly so. So, it's hard to predict what's going to happen, but I can tell you that it feels like, I haven't looked back actually and seen how long the unrest lasted after those other instances that you mentioned, but it feels like this one is more widespread, it's global. Um, you see a lot more individuals from a number standpoint. You see a large cross section of individuals, ethnically, economically, occupationally, that are involved. And so I think it does have that different feel because it's such a larger outcry and such a larger response than what we have seen in the past.
Ben, it seems like now people are looking for real leadership in all walks of life, local, state, federal, in their communities, in their businesses. Do you feel maybe more of a responsibility because people have gravitated towards you as a leader of men, not only in the locker room, but in society because of what you've written and how you've spoken about topics that need to be discussed? Do you feel, I guess, compelled to do more at this time in our country's history?
Fletcher, I feel like we all have a responsibility, and for myself, I feel I I'm someone that hates injustice, and we've had these conversations before. And whether it comes to racism, whether it's sexism and abuse, whether it's the unborn child in the womb, whether it is trafficking, taking advantage of young girls or young boys, you name it. I hate to see people treated wrongly, and I hate to see those who do wrong to others not properly punished and receive the consequences for what they've done. And so I always feel a weight and a burden to do whatever I can to help individuals and correct systems that uphold those types of injustices. And what I really felt over the last several weeks is my inadequacy. And I keep going back to the fact that, we all have certain talents and abilities. We all have a certain sphere of influence. We all have a certain bandwidth to do some of these things, but we can't do it all by ourselves. And most importantly, I can't do it by myself without constantly reconnecting and allowing the Spirit of God to work through me. Like I will get so upset and angry that I'll be unproductive, or I'll lash out at somebody on Twitter, as I'm sure I've done, and had to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And so, I do feel like there's more that I can do. I do feel like I want to learn more. When I challenge others to read books, I'm challenging myself. What I'm saying is that, we should call and talk to those who we are in close relationship with that are different than us. We should definitely do that. But I don't think that that's all we should do. I think there should be that conversation. I've had several of them over the last few weeks with friends, most of them white, who are trying to figure out what's going on. Is this even real? What should I do? I feel this way. But I think that there also has to be a commitment, like with anything else that we do, to prepare ourselves and to educate ourselves on exactly what is going on and to dig deeper than what we may actually see as the truth. We all see certain things as true and false. Let's dig into it and let's learn the history of the problems that we face. Then we can better equip ourselves to attack them. So I do feel like there's more I can do. There's more that I want to do. I think there's more that I'm going to discover in the future that I'll be able to do when it comes to these issues.
Ben, if I could take us back, say 9 or 10 days, obviously Drew Brees' comments, the fallout from those comments, his apology, his tweet at the President of the United States. Can you just discuss the entire situation, since you are a former Saint, you were in that locker room, you are friends with Drew Brees and many of the players that spoke up about this situation?
Yeah, I saw the comments. I spoke about the comments. I talked to Drew. I saw his apology. Um, I don't think this is an issue for the guys moving forward. They approached it like guys in the locker room. When somebody says something, you check them on it, you apologize, you make up, and then you move on. I do, however, understand the outcry that people had because we are in a very, very emotional time. We are doing a lot of soul searching as a nation. We are confronting and thinking about institutions that have inherent um, bias in them, and not just policing. We're talking about housing, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about education, we're talking about the criminal justice system. There are so many things that are rolled up into this 1 month or this 1 year. So to hear somebody that they revere so much say that and to be a surprise to them, I understand the outcry. Um, but you know what? He apologized for it, and and hopefully now, and even then, he understands what he understands people. You know, Drew loves the city. He loves people. He always has. I don't think anybody can dispute that. And so moving forward, um, I think there's going to be some coming together with him and others, not just in the locker room but in the city. And I have no doubt that people are forgiving. If you address where you mess up and you can talk about it, I think people are very able and willing to move on.
Ben, if we could pivot away from race relations in our country for just a minute, you have a documentary coming out this fall. If you could talk a little bit about that, it covers another topic that is divisive, the topic of abortion.
Yeah, I'm all about the uncomfortable subjects, Fletcher. This one is about the topic of abortion, and it's a documentary called "Divided Hearts of America." And really, in light of last year we saw very conservative laws being passed in states like Alabama and Georgia. We also saw very liberal laws being passed in states like New York and Illinois. And there was a ramping up. There is a ramping up of Supreme Court cases, and a ramping up of arguing and contention when it comes to abortion. And so what I did was I went on a journey. I spoke with over 30, 40 different people in the fields of politics, of medicine, culture, academia, people who have had abortions, people who have not had abortions, people in abortion clinics, people also who work for Planned Parenthood, which is the lead abortion provider, trying to get my head around this topic that is so, for lack of a better word, dividing, not divisive, but dividing in American culture. And so the documentary will release this fall, Divided Hearts of America. And really it's my journey getting to the heart of what abortion is and the importance of us addressing this important topic. Because again, for me, as I mentioned before, this is another justice issue. And I don't differentiate, I don't separate between, left, right, Democrat, Republican. My issues have to do with a biblical worldview, and they have to do with justice, with treating people fairly. And so what I try to present is the truth on abortion and try to hear from people from both sides of the aisle. Also to humanize both narratives. A lot of times we get on one side of this issue especially, or we get on the other side of this issue, and we demonize the other side and strip their humanity and call them the worst of names and say that they don't care about people. And what I found is that no matter where people fell, there seemed to be a genuine reason why they felt that way, and I wanted to create an atmosphere of understanding, even if people don't agree on this topic.
All right, Ben, I'm sure we'll be talking more about your documentary coming up later this fall as its release date gets nearer and nearer. One final question here, maybe a moment of levity since we've discussed some heavy but important topics. Brady Brees, week one. You played with Drew Brees here in New Orleans. You were a teammate of Tom Brady in New England. Now it's Tom Brady in Tampa. Bucks, Saints in the Dome, week one. Who do you got?
Oh man, I want to go. Can you give me a ticket? Can you give me a sideline pass, please? I don't know who it is. I can't even. It's too early for me to answer that question. I got to see how these teams come out of this COVID thing. Who's in shape? Who's ready to go? And then maybe we can touch base again a little bit closer to it. But I can tell you that it's going to be a special year in the NFC South. I mean, Tom and I talked last year a lot about where he was going to be. Nobody knew. I mean, I don't know if he knew. None of us knew. We talked about he was there or he was somewhere else, and we would all make jokes about this team or that team, or you ain't going. You're going to stay here in New England. None of us really knew. So when the word came out about Tampa, the first thing I thought was, oh man, you got to go to that Superdome. it's gonna be fun. So I'm looking forward to watching these games. Hopefully, I can come and see one in person. I told my son I need to bring him down there to see the game.
Former New Orleans Saints tight end Ben Watson. Insightful, amazing conversation. Thank you so very much for your time.